In this section, we are going to work on the second part of your dissociation process, which consists of identifying the causes that prevent you from dissociating. These causes are nothing more than effects that limit your ability to get away from that person or situation that hurts you. I am sure that on many occasions you have tried on your own to dissociate yourself from that person or situation. Of course, at an unconscious level, because this is where we are building the frame of reference so that you can do it. But what happens when you try to get away from all this that overwhelms you so much? A kind of force of psychic gravity arises in you that prevents you from escaping what hurts you. It is as if you walked away and invisible, elastic bands force you to get involved again in that relationship or situation that was toxic to you, that manifests itself through thoughts and emotions. So, if you were in my office, I would ask you the question, why cannot you dissociate? At first, you are going to tell me that you don't know why. But once you recognize the limiting forces, you will realize how easy it will be to walk away from everything that hurts you. In the case of this program, I am going to show you the three main forces that limit the fact that you cannot dissociate from what hurts you. The first of them is what others think. The second limiting force is what you think about yourself, that on many occasions arises as a consequence of the fear force. And the third limiting force is the consequences that will arise for your life if you dissociate. Let's look at the first limiting force, which prevents you from dissociating. What do others think of you? So, you try to dissociate, but when you move away, that elastic that I told you about arises in you. That makes you return to that emotional world from which you cannot escape. Even when you say that this is not the case, you will realize that even at an unconscious level, the perception that others have of who you are plays a fundamental role in whether or not you can live a relationship or situation that is toxic to you. In the example I am talking about here, my client could not dissociate himself from his ex-girlfriend because he had a group of friends who made fun of him because of the deception he had suffered. You know, these groups of men where masculinity was a very important thing. As you can see, dissociation did not occur because every time he tried to do so, his friends acted like these elastic bands of psychic gravitation that forced him to return to his desire to be with his previous partner. He wanted to stop having feelings for this person, but every time he did it, one of his friends made a hurtful comment. For example, if your girlfriend left you, it is because you did not give her enough satisfaction on a sexual level, which is what she is surely giving her present boyfriend. Those were the jokes they played on him. And this caused this person to feel that it was his manhood, his virility, that had been questioned by his ex-girlfriend. That's why, if you notice, he harassed his ex-girlfriend's current partner and challenged him to fight, because he wanted to regain his lost manhood. The one that was always coming to light through the practical jokes that his friends played on him. And in the case of this client, they weren't just his friends, but there were a series of other people who lived hurting him. I already told you about his mother, who told him that he was a failure for having lost his girlfriend. When we did the work in the consultation, this person realized that he was bound by at least 8 elastic bands of emotional gravitation in relation to what others thought of him. So, in your case, As the first step in this process of recognizing the causes that prevent your dissociation, I want you to think about who are the people who say something about you, or at least who are the people who you think could have an opinion that hurts you. And based on that, the next thing I want you to think about is what do you think those people say about you in relation to your failure as a couple or the situation from which you cannot dissociate yourself. And thirdly, you must define how that affects you. Do you think it has something to do with your manhood, with your femininity, with your morals, with your success? As you can see, the reasons are varied. But if you do this exercise, you will notice that little by little, that you will begin to recognize the people who hurt you, and that will allow you to break the emotional elastic that prevents you from getting out of that situation. The next limiting element is what I think of myself. In this case, what you think of yourself. I already mentioned that my client could not dissociate because his friends, by playing practical jokes on him, constantly forced him to think that his manhood was being questioned due to abandonment. If you notice, it doesn't even have to do with his girlfriend, but rather it has to do more with what others make you believe about who you are. Therefore, the question arose for this person, which was what I did within the framework of the therapy I was subjecting him to. Why do you think your manhood is so relevant? And secondly, why do you think that your friends' opinions are so important to you? In this case, my client thought that if he was not a man, that qualified him as someone who did not have the ability to care for others, something that occurred due to the abandonment that he has suffered from his father when he was a child. In this case, he had become the surrogate father of the family. That is why it was so important for him to feel respected as a man, because it was associated with that role of father that he had taken in his family when he was just a child. And that's why, in your case, I want you to think about the following. What do you think you stop being because of what others think of you? Or what makes you what others think of you? In a fool, in an immoral person, etc. And based on that, the second thing I want you to think about is what kind of ability you lose to interact with the world in which you live. You stop being qualified to be rich, to find a partner, to take care of the people who are important to you. And third, I want you to think about what event from your past relates to everything you are feeling. Maybe it is the abandonment of your father or mother, like the case of this client I am talking to you about here. Maybe it is related to the bad treatment you suffer from someone, and that causes you to think bad things about yourself, which you want to resolve by not dissociating yourself from that person who hurts you so much. And the third limiting factor that we are going to explore here is the negative consequences that you perceive that will arise for you if you dissociate. If you don't do it, it is because you clearly fear that something bad is going to happen to you if you stop being tied to that relationship or situation that is traumatic for you. An example of this is what happens when we do not leave a job in which we do not feel comfortable because we are receiving some type of abuse. We do not do it because we fear the consequences of that act. We are going to run out of money and we are not going to be able to pay the rent. But we continue in that toxic job. The same thing happens with failed relationships or traumas. There are people who do not dissociate from traumatic events they have faced because they fear that if they do, no one will care about them anymore. That's why you will notice that there are people who become eternal victims, that they are always talking about how much they suffered because that allows them to continue receiving a certain type of emotional benefit without which they feel lost. Something similar happened in my client's case. On the one hand, there was fear, and on the other hand, there was benefit. In the first case, there was the fear that if the relationship ended permanently, he would not have access to the lifestyles that having a girlfriend as successful as the one he had at that time provided him. If you look, this relates to not having the confidence to achieve success on your own. In the case of benefit, he remained tied to that relationship because he believed that people cared for him more and valued him if he remained as the boyfriend in love, even though he had been cheated on by his girlfriend. And that's why he tried to show himself as someone who was always willing to forgive the girlfriend who had hurt him, because by doing so, he appeared to others as a good person. Something that in this particular case had a lot to do with the religious training that he had received during his childhood. He was programmed to forgive because he believed that he gained social benefits for doing so. So, in your case, I want you to think about exactly what you fear will happen to you if you dissociate from the person you want to do it. And what benefit do you get from the people around you by remaining tied to a relationship that didn't work or to a traumatic situation in which you were a victim? As you can see, thanks to everything we have done up to this point, we have taken one more step so that you can get away from those people, experiences, or emotions that hurt you so much. In the next section, we are going to explore the third step of this dissociation process, which is acceptance of what happened to you. I see you there.